That's perfect competition under the hood. Let's look at the cost curves that we've already seen when looking at the production side in general, where we have an average total cost, an average variable cost, and a marginal cost, also an average fixed cost, but we don't really look at that for this section. What we were looking at when we looked at those curves was the firm's standpoint, not the market, but the firm. But it's related a little bit to the market. This is the familiar picture that we've already seen a million times. We have an upward sloping supply curve, where as the price goes up, the quantity supplied goes up because of the law of supply, and we have a downward sloping demand curve, where as the price goes down, the quantity demanded goes up because of the law of demand. And the supply side of the market and the demand side of the market meet at that point where the quantities demanded and supplied are exactly the same at a particular price. And from this, we get our market price. Remember we talked about causal relationships and why the price, it's not wrong to have the price on this axis. There's no true causal relationship between the two, but often enough there is a relationship in which the quantity and things that go into choosing the optimal quantity will affect the market price. So the quantity can affect the price. The price emerges from just the different features of the demand and the supply sides of the market, how much the supply side is willing to produce at each potential price, and how much the demand side is willing to purchase at each potential price. Wherever that comes together, wherever that becomes equal, that's where we have our equilibrium market price and market quantity. And we can see that if suppliers are not going to supply extra quantity at this price, but they're very happy to supply lower quantities at this price, it's easy to see how markets under these very, very perfect conditions will clear here. Producers are not going to incur the cost of producing any more than they can sell at this price given market demand. So we know this picture well. This is the market supply and demand curve. This supply curve is every firm added up, and this is the demand for every single consumer, whether they're in the market, like these guys here, or they're not in the market, like consumers, on this part of the demand curve. This is the market supply and demand curve. The firm's curves are a little different, and we've seen this picture before. And this is the perfectly competitive firm is the title of this slide, but this basic picture actually applies to every market structure. Every firm, no matter what the market is, has a set of curves that look like this. What we're doing is we're building the perfectly competitive firm's cost curves, what they look like given what happens in a perfectly competitive market. We're going to add something to this that makes it perfect competition, but no matter what the market is, every firm has whatever cost structures it has. The costs are based on what the wages are, what the cost of raw materials are, what the costs of energy are, what they have to pay for whatever loans they took out to run their business. All of those different costs have nothing to do with the market. They have nothing to do with whether they have competitors or not. These are just the costs of doing business. So these curves are going to look the way they look in every single market we're going to look at. We have an average total cost curve that lies above the average variable cost curve. They have similar structures, but they're not perfectly parallel, and the average total cost curve is always above the average variable cost curve at every quantity level. This vertical axis is not just prices, it's costs and revenues. And we can even say prices. It's basically whatever we can put a dollar sign next to if we're using US currency. Because you have to pay your costs with US currency, your revenues are measured in US currency, and your price is going to be US currency. So I oftentimes just put a dollar sign up here and the usual Q here. And then the curves look exactly the way they do no matter what the market is. So, in a perfectly competitive market, this is the price, but this is also, this D equals demand. This is the firm's perceived demand curve. And we're going to see that it's also equal to marginal revenue. We're also going to see that this will always be equal to marginal cost at every optimal production level. We'll get to that. But this is the perceived demand curve, is the same as the market price. The perceived demand curve. Going back a couple slides, this can be the demand curve in a perfectly competitive market. Because this demand curve represents people who are just staying home, not because of social distancing, but because the price is too high. Their maximum willingness to pay. Recall that everyone on this end of the demand curve has a maximum willingness to pay that is below the market price. So this market only includes consumers who are willing to pay the market price. So these people aren't coming into the business. They're not buying because this price is too high. They're not in the market. So the firm doesn't see these folks. These people are not showing up to the business to buy the good or service. The firm doesn't know about them. The firm knows about the people who are going to buy their good and service at the price that's being charged. So the firm's perceived demand curve is flat. So we can see why this lower part of the demand curve isn't there, why we would have a flat line that doesn't include these guys, but why is it a flat line? Why isn't the firm's perceived demand curve, why doesn't it include these people who are willing to pay more? Well, the answer is, recall, we have many firms, and we have ease of entry and exit in the market. Actually, one thing I didn't say in the previous videos, we have full information. It's another thing that makes this unrealistic. In real life markets, there are what we call information asymmetries. I may have mentioned Joseph Stiglitz, one of my heroes in the economic profession. The guy should have maybe 3 Nobel Prizes, but you're only allowed to get one per person, and more economists than Nobel Prizes, so they only gave him 1, and as an added insult, they made him split it with a couple other guys. Go figure, right? He's one of the most brilliant economists who ever lived, and he's still living and still working. I disagree with a lot of stuff he says, but so what? He's a brilliant guy. The thing that he had to split the Nobel Prize for was his work on information asymmetries, which basically means that suppliers may not know what consumers know, and consumers may not know what producers know. So producers may sell a bunch of garbage to a consumer who thinks they're buying a bunch of diamonds. And the consumer may know that they're perfectly willing to pay higher prices, but the consumer doesn't know that. So we don't have a situation where everybody knows everything in real life. Modeling those kinds of economies is difficult, but it can be done, and Stiglitz was one of the guys who showed us how to do it. So he deserved that Nobel Prize. He just deserves a couple others. But I digress. With perfect competition, we assume that there's perfect information. So these folks here who are willing to pay a higher price, if you know they're willing to pay it, doesn't matter. Because just because you're willing to pay a higher price doesn't mean you will. If you're getting a good deal from somebody else, you're going to go where the deal is and keep your money to buy something else. You would be irrational not to do so. And remember, economists assume everybody's rational. There's no irrationality. One of our most realistic assumptions that we make. Remember, no irrationality. Sarcasm, remember. So, if you charge a price that's higher, there may be people who are willing to pay it, but they're still not going to pay it because they don't have to. They can go to your competitors. There's no reason to charge a price that's lower, though, because remember, market's clear in these unrealistic but still very beautiful, perfectly competitive markets. So this is a price you're going to charge. And the quantities demanded go as high as you can handle. As you can handle. And this is why we don't have infinite quantities produced, even though you can sell all of them. Because when you put it all together, remember this curve here. Rising marginal costs. The higher your quantities, the more it's going to cost to make more. Remember, every firm has capacity constraints. Every firm has a limit to what they can make. Now, if prices go up, firms are going to find a way to make more, but they're not going to be able to avoid these rising marginal costs. They're going to have to pay workers overtime. They're going to have to hire new workers who are going to demand higher wages if the market runs out of labor. And existing workers might demand higher wages too. They might run up against the physical ability to produce in whatever production facilities they're using. They're going to need to get new ones in a pinch, which means accepting higher prices, renting out space from other people, extra costs that they don't have to incur at lower production levels. They do at higher production levels. Marginal costs just keep on going up as your production goes up in the short run. So, yeah, you would like to make infinite quantities because you'll sell them all at this market price in this theoretical market structure, but you're constrained by your rising marginal costs. So this is a long run graph of a perfectly competitive firm. It can exist in the short run, but in the long run, it's going to end up right here for the average firm. It's a long run, even though we have average variable costs, which are different than average total costs. I'm saying it's the long run because the intersections of all of these curves here are the long run outcome. We can eliminate this average variable cost curve if we want to and say that in the long run, we're going to end up here. But in the long run, price is going to be equal to average total cost, is going to be equal to marginal cost, is going to be equal to marginal revenue. And we're going to revisit that. But this is what the perfectly competitive firm's cost curves are going to look like. The price is equal to marginal revenue, is equal to marginal cost, is equal to average total cost, and this is also the firm's perceived demand curve. You're starting to see why I get a little wistful, and so do other economists when talking about perfectly competitive firms. Everything's just equal here. It's all the same. It's so simple. It's so neat. It's so pretty, and it's just so... Excuse me, sorry. It's the most perfect market structure. We'll get back into why this is so beautiful later, but it is also unrealistic, unfortunately. In the long run, this is what we see. So, a question we're going to ask for all four market structures. How does a firm, PC by the way, this is the abbreviation for perfect competition. In an economic context, it is not the abbreviation for political correctness because economists are not politically correct. That's why they call it the dismal science. I still think it's a happy science. We just saw happy things like perfect competition, but we just describe what is, and a lot of people hate the conclusions we come to all across the political spectrum. That's why everybody hates economists, I guess, but go figure. We're not politically correct. But we do study perfect competition. So PC means perfect competition because we do deal with perfect competition so we can get a nice baseline thing to look at and we can establish the ideal. So PC means perfect competition. So we're going to ask for all market structures. How do we determine how much to produce and what price to charge? That question is going to be answered in different ways for each market, but there are going to be similarities as well. First of all, for perfectly competitive markets, the price part is easy. They're price takers, remember? The market already figured out what that price is. All the different firms have the price that they're charging. Your customers know that they can get that price at other firms, and that price is as low as you can go in the long run. We're going to see why that's the case. But the price is the price. And you have no control over that. So the price is figured out for you. Nice and easy. Isn't that great? Well, it actually turns out that it kind of sucks because, well, that's why it's hard to make an economic profit. Actually impossible in the long run in perfectly competitive markets. But at least it takes away one of the many complexities of running a business. You don't have to decide about price. Price has been figured out for you. Just match your competitors' prices and you're good to go. It makes it sound easier than it is. But again, that's why this is an economics class, not a business administration class. This is the basics of what you need to know before you go to business school so that you know what they're playing off of when they get into reality, as they do in business school. Economics, we can still live in fantasy land. It's great. Quantity. This is where it gets a little more complicated, but there is a simple rule that makes this easy, and it turns out that this decision is going to be made the same way in every different market, so it's worth spending time on. But again, I don't want these videos to get longer than 15 minutes, so we're not going to talk about it in this video. You're going to learn about it as soon as you're ready to watch the next one.